Friday afternoon, everyone. I'm Zach Keeney, joined by Matthew Fish, and we welcome you all to another Fort Mesa Cyber Roundtable. If you haven't already, make sure you check out last week's webinar on YouTube. We had Amy Babinchak on from Third Tier to have a discussion about Zero Trust using Azure AD and Intune, and we covered CIS version 8, Control 3, data protection. If you're new to the roundtable this week, make sure to check out our educational video library on YouTube, and please like us on LinkedIn. Today we have Daniel Welling from the MSP Finance Group to discuss key performance indicators for a growing MSP. We'll do full introductions in a moment, but first, how's everybody doing today?
I'm appreciating my misprint shirt here. So I don't know if you guys can tell, my logo is a little slightly different color than Zach's shirt here, but we're all in black today, so at least we got that going for us. David's on team black too. So
big coordination was done.
I got the memo, but different logos.
Well, he's got a collection of black T-shirts on the wall back there.
Absolutely right. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, tell us about those. That's interesting for sure.
Yeah. So to my left shoulder, we have a now defunct rugby team, London Wasps, and to my right we have a Williams F1 team T-shirt, signed by Damon Hill, former F1 world champion.
Okay. Is that him in the tiny photo that I can't see from all the way over here?
Absolutely, and that's him with his best mate Daniel Welling, who he met for about 20 seconds having the photo taken.
That's great.
We all queued up at this. It was a sporting lunch, and he was the guest speaker, and we all queued up before the lunch. And they're saying to us, he doesn't want to know your name, anything about you. He just look at the camera, smile, and move on.
They want to move quick, huh?
Yeah,
that's funny. Well, Daniel, we appreciate you joining us. Where are you joining us from? Where are you located?
So I'm just to the west of London, in the UK. It's actually just gone 7:30 in the evening here on a Friday night. So there's
bringing the party to us, I guess.
Well, there's a beer in the fridge chilling at the moment. So at 8:31, we'll be
there you go.
We'll be cracking that open. Yeah.
Nobody would have turned a side eye to you if you had a sip or two. We'd have seen that.
I thought about it. I was worried it might be morning there, and I might.
Fair enough. Well, to our virtual guests, please feel free to let us know where you guys are joining us from in the comments section. And before we dive into introductions, any plans or anything else you guys want to cover before we jump in?
No, so I spent early in my career, I spent some time in business intelligence, and learning about metrics design, learning about how to build up a performance indicator. But it's been a long time since I dove into that world. So I'm actually very interested, Daniel, the types of measures that you're looking at for how to evaluate a business. I'm aware, when people are, an MSP is growing, at some point they say to themselves, I feel pretty good and maybe I want to do something different, and they want to capitalize or they want to exit from their business. These measures become pretty important, right? And I know that I've been pushing people towards, recurring revenue. You should think about security mixing your products. You could think about your gross margins, but I am not actually informed enough to be telling them what their actual indicators should be. So I am interested in that. But before we dig in there, I think we gotta do control of the day, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So with that. So today is CIS Controls version 8, Control 16, application software security. This one is super interesting because it's maybe the only, if not the only one of the only controls in CIS where this is not recommended for small businesses.
Yeah, I was going to say right away, Matt, I noticed nothing in IG1 there. No
Nothing
dots,
in
no green dots.
IG1. So as a reminder, IG1 is for small businesses that are probably running off-the-shelf software. They probably have no regulatory requirements. They probably are not impacting human safety. They're just using basic computers, and basic security is enough for them. But IG2, a lot of times there's custom software. With custom software is the need for custom security for custom software, thus application software security. Um, and this control is a long one. It's split into 14 pieces, and almost all of them are recommended for anyone that has any piece of custom software in their business. Anyone who's running software that didn't come off the shelf, wasn't shrink wrapped, should have this security. As well as that, anyone with a full IT department where they're managing their own systems, if you have your own IT staff, you should have this security because you probably have business applications you need to protect. Um, yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Stupid question for you, but how do I know if I have custom software? Because I've owned a
Okay.
business and I didn't know.
Okay, so I know a little bit of the backstory with your business. So Um, if you have a business and you're using what we refer to in industry as shrink wrap software only, so that's you're using Google products, you're using Microsoft products, but you don't have a piece of software that's built for your industry. You don't have a piece of software that has your company logo on it, right? You probably are not using custom software, which means that the application software vendor is responsible for that application software security. But if you're running a piece of software that has your company name in it or is very specific to your industry, or if you think that the vendor that created software for you maybe isn't doing their part for security, you want to do your own application software security controls. And I'm just going to run through this super quick as I can through a 14-point security plan. What does it mean to do security for a custom piece of software? The first thing is here in 16.1 is to have some type of process for developing a secure application. This probably means that you sat down as a team and discussed the things that you're going to do and the things that you're not going to do to create secure software and maintain secure software. It's probably the list of things we're about to go through, but it may contain other things. So that's the plan piece, and that should always be first. Part of that plan and part of your processes on a regular basis should to address software vulnerabilities. Now, it says here accept and address. So it's actually reasonable for you not to fix a software vulnerability as long as you understand you have the vulnerability and your business owners or your customers know about it. So it's not possible to fix every vulnerability, and some of these vulnerabilities are things you just need to accept because you're creating software, and software's not perfect. But yeah, go ahead.
There's a little bit of a Michael Scott I declare situation here. What does it mean when you say to accept? Because it's obviously not enough for Daniel or myself to just say, okay, I accept it, right? That's not what you mean. What do you mean by accept?
So there's many different ways of managing risk. I'm not going to go through all the methods of risk management, but when you're looking at vulnerabilities, there's a few things you can do. You can either ignore them, which means you're not even informing yourself on them, right? You're just avoiding the problem. In no scenario is that acceptable from a security policy perspective. If you're going to be accepting the risk of something, you need to do at least enough research to understand the risk you're accepting. So if you do research into a vulnerability and you understand, well, theoretically this thing could happen, this is how it would happen, this is who might do it, this is the impact that would happen, and this is the likelihood that will happen. If you've sort of had that conversation about a risk, then it's reasonable to say, I accept this vulnerability. And by I accept, it's not just, okay, let's forget about this and move on. It's let's document, John Smith or Michael Scott, right? I accept this responsibility. And if a breach happens, Michael Scott can then say, well, yeah, I know we accepted that and we thought it was defensible because of this reason. And if it was a reasonable reason, you will pass the reasonable person test in any court of law or arbitration proceeding, and you'll be fine. If you couldn't, with a straight face, say that was a reasonable decision I made, right? That was the right thing to do. You will probably be held to account. So that's what accepting means. The other thing you can do is address them, which means that you either compensate for them or you eliminate them. Right? There's ways of eliminating, and there's a few different types of vulnerabilities, but we'll get into more detail there. So root cause analysis on security vulnerabilities. So if you found a vulnerability in your software, understand why does this vulnerability exist, and is this something that we could fix from a root cause perspective, so that it doesn't happen again? Or maybe there's 10 other vulnerabilities that are related that all have the same root cause, right?
Sure.
Making sure that you do that kind of analysis. Making sure that you inventory your third-party software components. So if anyone that's listening has ever built a piece of software, they probably know that no one builds software whole cloth from scratch. Everyone relies on the software that was built before us, the decades of software that was built before us. We have code that we can recycle, whether that's open source or whether we've purchased that source code, where we've purchased a commercial application that we're bringing into our supply chain. Every piece of software is built on other pieces of software, and you do need to do some limited analysis of those other pieces of software and chain. Luckily, there's great tools to do this. Sneak's our strategic partner in this area, Snyk.io, SNYK. There are other vendors like VeraCode that also specialize in this. There's a number of ways of relying on third-party security companies who've already done analysis on every piece of third-party code you could possibly imagine, and you can just simply import their findings based on what you're using in your software. Um, you also need to, and this is sort of related. We're not just creating a list of those things, but we're making sure that the list is up to date. We're making sure that the items are up to date. So if we're relying on a piece of code, making sure that it's not 12 years old, making sure that it's updated, making sure that someone's in charge of that piece of software, that we can trust that person, right? This wasn't like some random Joe in their basement that we don't even know who they are. This is like a company, a reliable company. Or it's a tool that hundreds of thousands of people are using. And so there's a reasonable assurance that it's a safe thing to use, right? Um, in addition to that, when you go through this process, you are probably going to find hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerabilities in your software that you've built. So you do need a system to rate them, right? Because you're likely not going to fix everything, and so you do need to focus on the things that are the highest risk. So that's 16.6. Um, Standard hardening configuration templates. This is the same type of thing that as a server administrator you do on your servers. In Active Directory, Azure AD, maybe in your RMM, you do things like, make sure the screen locks, right? Make sure that the disk is encrypted. Well, we want to look at things on your application server infrastructure and say, well, make sure TLS is enabled, right? Make sure that the security features of the software tools that your software is incorporating are turned on and configured securely. And making sure that they're standardized and they're always deployed in the same way, right? And if someone changes those configurations, making sure that we have some way of going back to that hardened template. Closing in on the second half of the list here, separating production and non-production systems. I know for a lot of organizations, they have development systems, they have test systems, and they have production systems. Some people have even more stages than that. We have in our dev environments, we have 5 or 6 distinct stages that code has to go through to make it to production. And each of those have different tests that are done along that testing pipeline. For organizations that maybe don't have that maturity level, it's not uncommon to mix and match production and test, or to have developers developing code directly in production to fix things quickly. And while it may save time, and it may be easy to get that kind of infrastructure up and going, if you don't have a regimented, this is development, this is testing, this is production, and you are really separating production from development, it's really difficult to have any kind of surety in your production systems. Developers shouldn't even have access to production. If your team's large enough to have a separate development team than a production engineering team, you'd want to have that division. And in today's world, a lot of people outsource their development offshore, right? If you're doing business with financial services, if you're doing business in federal contract spaces, there's actually laws against certain types of people having access to those systems. And so separating those production and non-production systems is a critical concept there. And then train your developers, make sure they're trained in security concepts. So we're talking about things like OWASP Top 10. OWASP is an organization that maintains tip sheets on the type of weaknesses that developers should be trained in avoiding, as well as the types of security that should be in place when they're building applications. But there's other design principles there. I would say it's a requirement that any developers working for you should be forced to go through some kind of training in that. Design principles in application architecture. So this is similar to the production versus non-production, but think about an application that may separate the front end from the back end from a database, right? A standard our software in our company is what you call a CRUD application. It creates, reads, updates, or deletes from a database, and the front end is responsible for visually presenting that data to the end user. But we make sure that any security constraints are actually built into the middleware. They're on the server. They don't exist in the web browser because anyone can do anything to their web browser. Any of your users can change the way their web browser performs, and you wouldn't want them to break into your database just because someone put the security in the wrong place in the application architecture. And that's what they're talking about here. And then the last thing that's sort of mandatory for application security is using vetted modules for security components. So as an example here, if you're using encryption, you probably shouldn't invent the encryption yourself, even if you theoretically are really good at math, right? It makes much more sense to take the encryption module, the piece of security from some organization that's specialized in that, and forklift the whole piece of code so that you know that you're using a secure module there. Another really good example of this is authentication. It's best practice these days, believe it or not, as a software developer, not to run your own authentication system. We don't run our own authentication system. We rely on a framework from a company called Auth0. They're owned by Okta, and they're responsible for our user authentication. And there's nothing that our programmers can do wrong that would damage the user authentication because we're relying on that trusted vetted module for that. So real quick, I'm going to go into the advanced things. So that everything I just talked about, it's required for a secure operating environment if you're in any organization that has any kind of custom software. If you're not doing all the things I just said, you are not running a secure business application. The next three things are optional, and it would be for organizations that deal with regulated data, or they have some kind of impact on human safety, or maybe they're a large organization, and this has some kind of critical impact on their business. So the last three things are code level security checks. So there's many different ways to do code level security checks, but this is different than what I mentioned earlier, where there's companies that will just look at the modules you've imported to make sure that the code you're relying on that's written by other people is secure. This is where you actually go through and make sure the code that you've written looks secure. And there's both automated ways of doing that as well as manual methods for verifying the security of code. And I think an exact depth there might be something that would require some consultation with someone that specializes in this. But both Sneak and VeraCode have modules for doing code level security checks. Application penetration testing, I think people think they know what this means. It's exactly what it sounds like. Someone tries to break into your software. Something that people may not know is you are probably not accomplishing the goal of this control if you use any kind of automated tool. An application penetration test is performed by a human that's certified and trained to use those tools. So this is not something you can buy SaaS and click a button. This is you contract with a person who's gone through a lot of training and knows how to use those tools and maybe is doing some manual things besides to try to break into your application. And they're going to give you a report and they're going to explain their findings and they're going to sit with you and make sure you understand how you can solve those things. This is not an automated activity. And then the last thing is threat modeling, and there's different ways of doing threat modeling, but my favorite way is just to get people together and sit around a table and just discuss what are the various ways that our software could go wrong? How could people break this either on purpose or accidentally? Have we sufficiently managed all these different potential threats? An expert might go into even more depth, and there's people that you can consult with to do a deep threat model. Certainly, if anyone's curious about that, send me some kind of direct message. I can hook you up with an expert. So that's it for application software security. Super dense. I know we just spent like 15 minutes on that, so I'm gonna try to exhale here.
I'm dying for a green tea, a little caffeine shot. Give me juiced up again.
That's application software security in short. So with that, I think today's supposed to be about business analysis, right? So, Daniel, before I hand you the stage, I want to tell you the things that I've heard from our partners, right? They're oftentimes looking at, so this is something I hear from MSPs that have just sort of got their heads above water, right? They're operating their business. It's they're making money or they're breaking even, and they're trying to understand how to get those profitable customers, or how to seek profitable revenue streams to power growth in their organization, right? And a little bit later in their career, they start asking themselves, okay, I don't want to do this until I'm 90. But last time I checked, my business wasn't worth that much because my margins are here or whatever, and the multiplier is only 3x, and even though they're doing millions of dollars a year in business, when they look at the sale price, it barely buys a car. And they're saying to themselves, I just worked for 25 years. How come I can't sell this to someone? So they start looking into metrics and measures at that point because they're told, hey, the dynamics, your business isn't built right. The metrics don't look good. But they don't necessarily know what that even means, because they, until you start thinking about selling your business, you're probably not digging too deeply on that stuff. But probably people should be thinking a lot sooner so they can start making the strategic choices they need to steer in the right direction. So I know people ask questions about that all the time, because I talk to a lot of MSPs and people have those types of questions, but I rarely have the answers other than check out service leadership, or you should give Daniel Welling a call. So I think with that, what are the questions you hear from people? Because you probably get a lot more nuance than I do in that space.
Yeah, and but before you went through the application security controls, you set the scene by really talking about beginning with the end in mind, and what a successful exit looks like, and really that's where the majority of conversations that I might have at a community event with an MSP owner is, what's the M&A market look like at the moment, Daniel, and what are people getting, and often and probably exactly the same in the field of security. Naturally, we all want to dilute something down to a pure, simple, if I just do one thing or two things or three things, will I be able to get a simple, a simple answer to a complicated question? But actually, MSPs are complicated businesses, and there's very rarely one simple answer, one simple number to look at and follow. And every MSP I talk to is always on some kind of curve of, you mentioned SLI, and if we talk about operational maturity, just maturity in the business and in the individuals within the business is an important thing to think about whenever you're trying to identify a target or a number to measure, or whatever the frame of reference is. And we actually the last couple of years, Adam and I have been building a financial maturity model, inspired by other models that are out there, but really sort of pulling together all of our collective, what does good look like in all the different aspects of financial management, and probably the key thing at the beginning of the business is you're very much thinking about cash, looking at your bank balance all of the time, and measuring your success on that. But actually, cash can be impacted by so many things, and the actual measure, when we come to and correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology for the US, but when we get to year-end filings, and we're putting together our tax return, that number is not related directly to cash in the bank. It's accrual based, and therefore that's the first sort of disconnect that most young MSPs have, is they're not focusing sufficiently on what their tax return and their statutory accounts are going to look like. So actually, they're just measuring the wrong thing. Although cash is important to measure, you've got to be thinking about the statutory accounts, and very often the next challenge most young MSPs have is they only think about that once a year when they're doing their statutory returns. And actually, I don't know what the reporting window is in the US, but here in the UK we have to submit 9 months after the end of the year. So actually we're what's like a well more than a year looking back at numbers that we were producing. So we're nowhere near affecting, reacting to information now and affecting that to affect the next month, the next quarter. So it's a sort of realization that actually there's a lot that we've got to do to raise our monitoring systems and our analysis, and then taking action.
So I know in my reading in the MSP field here, operational maturity levels, OMLs from service leadership, are oftentimes used, which I guess it's a customized chart of accounts and a way of measuring that specifically for MSPs.
Mm-hmm.
And they look very deeply both at the practices on the sales side and the practices on the service delivery side, but very specifically at the mix of products and services and how much of that is recurring. And I presume that the mix of recurring to non-recurring services is an important measure. I also know that as you're saying, the impact of those accounts at the end of the year, the way the measure I'm taught to look at is usually EBIT, or sometimes EBITDA. Right, we're looking at what are your earnings, before taxes, and how do you even calculate those margins? And some MSPs may not be factoring in their, as an MSP leader, as a principal, they oftentimes don't factor in their own labor. And if you do fairly account for your own labor, sometimes MSPs that are, they've got cash at the end of the year, but they may have negative gross margins because they're undervaluing their own labor. And while it's perfectly fine to pay yourself a little bit if you're trying to set some money aside and reinvest in your business, when you go to sell your business, people are going to take a closer measure of how much you're paying yourself. And if you're only paying yourself $50,000, but you're running a business and it's got 8 people, the buyer is going to look at that and say, well, we can't replace you for $50,000 a year. So um,
It,
those EBIT numbers can sometimes be deceiving, I think.
uh, yeah, absolutely, without doubt. And actually, this comes again. I know that we were talking about KPIs, and when if we're going to look purely at KPIs, we really want to be looking at numbers that are going to lead into a result. But actually, until you've actually got the systems in place to measure where you are now and properly interpret it, some of the sexier KPIs are actually hard to implement. And you mentioned about SLI and the chart of accounts. There's a lot there, and it can be daunting for business owners to understand and fully implement it, akin to your CIS controls. Where do you start? Blimey, I'm never going to get a handle on all of that. So you actually summarize it very well. If you're working towards value in your business live, and that's something that I recommend all MSPs do. Don't wait until the future at some point when someone gives you a valuation. Apply valuation techniques today to your business, so that you can actually see your live valuation hopefully ticking up over the months. And one of the key behaviors, again not directly related to KPIs, that I advocate is budgeting and business planning, and a lot of people immediately start going to sleep when I talk about budgeting, and it can be a pretty dry topic, but I actually think it's really interesting because it's the modeling activity that you're doing that makes you formulate and agree to realistic expectations for your business. So if we want to go like that, and we want to have a big exit number, we're going to have to work really hard. It's going to be unpleasant. We're going to have to take lots of risk, and actually a lot of MSP owners aren't that sort of hard-nosed sort of business person. They're much steadier in their approach to life and their appetite for risk, and so but going slow and steady is not a bad thing. It will just take you longer potentially to get to that end number. The rate of ascent might be shallower. So building a budget and playing around with how the rate of growth of the business is a really important precursor to setting a KPI, and in fact gives you the KPI, because if you want to be at this number, then you want to look at this number here to see that you're on target for it.
Well, I think for some people, budgeting is a stressful experience, and because, well, and I might have used this. I either used this example recently in a customer conversation or on our last webinar. But budgeting is almost, if you haven't been doing it, it's almost like standing on the scale again when you haven't done it in a long time.
Yeah.
It's like you don't. You're not sure what you're going to see. You're afraid of what the cash flow looks like. You're afraid of where the money's going. So some people avoid to do that. But what budgeting really is it's asset allocation, or you're deciding what you want to do this year or however long you're budgeting for. What do I want to accomplish? So if you're not excited about that as a business owner, you should try to find a way to get excited about it, because you're deciding what the future of your business is going to look like when you're doing that. We focus a lot on helping our partners drive that recurring revenue. What are some of the recommendations that you have for driving towards recurring revenue and value in a business?
Can we back up a little bit?
Oh, yeah,
So
of course.
I did mention that the mix of recurring and non-recurring revenue being important, but I'll bet most of the people watching don't realize how important that is. I think last time I looked at a report on this, I was seeing EBIT multipliers for businesses with heavy recurring revenue mixes almost double that of businesses that focus on non-recurring revenue streams in their MSP.
Why is
So
that?
it could be the difference between a 3x and a 6x multiplier. And I actually don't know the reason why, Daniel. And I'm curious if is that really what's still happening right now in exits? Is that we're still seeing that trending?
Yeah, you're uh, uh, remind me to come back to a point about you can get away with it, about budgeting. I'll come back to that though.
Sure, I'll hold
In
that for you.
in the same way as you can not have a security breach and you got away with it, not because not because you didn't get a breach, but
Luck, a little lady luck
yeah,
on your side.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the multiplier effect primarily is about scale. But you're quite right. It is also about a recurring percentage. So the and the reason for that, if you're a buyer, you're handing over money. Your first question is, when am I going to get this money back? And
Reasonable question.
if it is recurring revenue and it is contracted, and those contracts are with solid assets, i.e., businesses that
Are
are
paying.
financially strong and unlikely to not be financially strong, and likely to not default on the contract, well, that's basically you're buying that future revenue. And one of the things that again often comes up in the MSP community discussion is about the concerns about vendors wanting to promote 3-year terms, and watermarks in terms of the level of commit, and that is because that's the basis of their business value, not just for an MSP, for any business. And so yeah, if you're driving towards exit, and you want to maximize that number, the bigger your numbers are and the higher the percentage of recurring will get you up into those higher multiples. However, it comes at a cost, because you have to ask your customer for a commit for a 3-year term, and if your selling point is, we don't tie our customers in because we're confident of our service level, then it's a good thing to say. And I'm not saying that it's not a valuable attribute in the sales process, but it's not going to help you with your valuation. So you've got to decide where you are on that. I want aggressive, fast growth, and I'm driving for exit, or actually I'm looking for a more comfortable, consistent way of living my life.
Now, as a SaaS company, if we have a churn number that's at a predictable, we can mathematically prove where our churn range is,
Mm-hmm.
right? The 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 amount of time that customers are contracted is less relevant. Clearly, we get to claim that revenue, that future revenue, on an accrual accounting model sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, if we have a customer count and we know what the churn is and all the customers look the same, we can also value that asset in much the same way. Is that true with an MSP? If they're really good about standardizing their offering, and all of
Mm-hmm.
their customers really do look like each other, and they're really delivering the same exact service, and the service fees are fixed, backed by an SLA, can they do the same thing?
It's a factor. I think probably the perception out there amongst MSP owners is it's what the weight of that factor outweighs other things. And I would say, I'm less knowledgeable of SaaS businesses, but a lot of MSPs tend to have pretty sticky customer relationships that do last a long time. And so they could therefore say, well, there's a low churn rate. Therefore, be confident that you're going to get your money back, Daniel, if you buy my business. Well, I would argue the reason for that stickiness and that low churn rate is you as the owner, because in a lot of cases, the SME MSP business, the sort of sub, say, 10, $15 million business, a lot of the customers buy from the owner. That's what they buy, and they're typically SME customers as well. So they buy, a small business likes to buy from another small business. They like to know that the owner of the business is available to them, and they buy that people buy from people, the old cliche. So
Communities and trust.
yeah, I would argue that the churn rate is probably less applicable to the MSP market.
That's an
So
interesting perspective.
and it depends on the service provider and the part of the market they're in.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
one of the things we do in our success process is we try to drive people towards those recurring services. But the biggest leap is not get your customer to sign a 36-month contract. The biggest leap is typically taking reactive customer relationship management. That you're right, it's it's relationship based. You have this relationship with the customer. There's this constant flow of communication around what they need, and then customizing delivery on a per hour basis, per machine basis, what
A
that
lot of
customer requires.
customization to get
And
it
it's
right.
very relationship oriented, but it is still possible to have that two-way communication if you move to a service level agreement. You define what you're delivering, you make the bundles static, you can still include the relationship, but you don't need to custom tailor your solution if you are delivering the right solution and you're opinionated with the customer about telling them what they should be receiving. So we, particularly in the MSPs that are serving small businesses, because they're more alike than medium-sized businesses, we recommend that the MSP is opinionated on what they're delivering, that they draw a box around it, create that bundle, and the bundle isn't just the pieces of software that you're reselling and the laptops that you're delivering.
What?
It's also the services that go with that. We're going to manage your users. We're going to
Oh,
respond on a ticket within n number of hours. Where these are the things we will always do for you. They're included always. These are the things we will never do for you because it's not our job, right? Drawing that box around it and trying to make that box the right shape so that you're not customizing that end delivery. Because when you can bundle in that way, you can move that customer. They will be happy to move into that recurring revenue scenario. Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but um, the Ford model, right? The assembly line model. If you know what you're going to be delivering, if you know what the end product looks like of your services, it becomes a lot easier to train your people on delivery. If you're talking about a customer success team or a sales team, training on delivery, training on value proposition. And then the actual delivery itself is a whole lot easier and more consistent. And then you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. So then you get even better at it. And that's how you create a process and a system and an organization that has repeated success, similar to comparing it to a sports team that does all of the right behaviors over and over and over again and is consistently at the top. MSPs are the same way. Businesses are the same way. You have to do all the right behaviors and have processes in
Yeah, and
place.
I guess I was very focused on, well, the customers like this because they like consistency, but you're right, because if you're also consistent and you're doing the same thing all the time, you're going to get efficient at it, right? And that's
Yeah.
how you're going to build up those gross margins. So you can impact both things by standardizing your processes around standard bundles, standard service deliveries, always do the same thing with all the customers, do the right thing for all the customers. Um, and boost your efficiency and your margins, right? But I think part of that is also knowing what business not to take, because if you say yes to all of your customers all the time, um, you will find yourselves doing a lot of things that are unprofitable and a lot of things that pull you away from that goal of getting towards that recurring revenue and that high efficiency. So Daniel, I mean, do you give people advice on how they should sell and how they should market? Because I know when I talk to a lot of MSPs, they say, well, I don't like any of my customers right now. but this is what we're
I'd
trying to do in
fire
the
them
future.
all.
Yeah.
And I say, well, why are you working with them if you don't like them? You know, and this is not a very common story, but I have heard that. Of
Yeah.
I don't like any of my customers right now. We have this one customer we like, but we're just keeping them because we can't get rid of them. But this is what we want to do in the future. But then they're trapped. They can't actually do the thing they want to do because they're trapped with the customers that they don't want. And is that a scenario that you've heard before, Daniel?
All the time. And again, let's not forget that everyone's on this, they're all on this arc, this curve, their journey. So they won customers 5 years ago with a particular mindset and approach, and then perhaps they've developed that over the years. They've become more educated and aware of what others do, and they've moved on, but they've perhaps not managed their customers along with them. There's a balance thing here in everything that you both just been talking about, actually, in terms of how rigid you are, what size and shape the boxes you draw around your service. Because if you make it too defined, you're gonna shrink your marketplace. If you make it too broad, you can address a wider market, but therefore you're probably having to deal with a lot more variation than is appropriate to get efficient. So it's all about balance. And the old sort of generic adage would be, well, if you doubled your price, you'd probably lose half your customers, but you'd be doing this, less work and getting more money for it. Why don't you do that? But this is, you can't. This is like giving a child a dangerous weapon. You have to remember that for a lot of MSPs, this is their living, and they are not aggressive, hard-nosed business people. They're making a living. They need to develop the confidence in themselves, in their business, in their customers, and they need to earn a living while they're doing that. So if you go and fire all your customers, you have all the time in the world, but you have no income. And equally, you don't want to work full time for your customers and never improve your business. So the uncomfortable truth about MSP land is, and we mentioned earlier, there's a million things that you need to work on in your business, but you're only going to do it a bit at a time. So one of the tactics that I would recommend if an MSP believes that they're underpricing, but they're not ready to go to all their customers and say, hey, we're increasing your price by a significant margin, then experiment with new customers, edging the price up each customer you win, even if it's a dollar at a time, and build that confidence up gradually, and then when you've really satisfied, you can go back and then gradually move all of your existing customers up. And you'll lose some, but so you're doing it in a controlled, managed way rather than a blunt instrument, and that's the reality of small business, I believe.
I really like the way that you said grow confidence, and because that's really the truth of the situation, right? Everybody's got a value. Some people are better at selling their value. So when you're saying building confidence, what you're really saying, I mean, and you're directly saying it, but it may not be clear. You're really saying go out there and get confidence that you can ask for what you're worth, and get closer and closer to what you think you're worth until you're there. So when you say, well, this is my price for this package, well, I got a bunch of people that are willing to pay it, and I do a great job. So this person can either, expletive off or come on board, but I know my value and I'm going to stand by my value. And I think that's hard for some people to do. And I think it's especially hard for people to do if they didn't land into MSP land as a business person. which is a lot of them, you know.
Mm-hmm. Quite
So
right. And just to that point, I noticed there was a comment in the chat about whether people can change from they can change from being tech to business, and absolutely they can, but it's not going to be overnight, and it's not going to be easy, and you need support, and you need someone to go along on the journey with, and that's where peer groups are great. There's more and more coaches and mentors in the marketplace, and so there's lots of sources of help to first of all educate, soak it up, and then build a plan, bit by bit. But yeah, gradually you won't immediately go from tech that doesn't even like to send an invoice to hard-nosed captain of industry.
Well,
and you may not
we've
want to.
seen,
Sorry.
And you may not want to, yeah.
we talk to a lot of MSPs, and we see techies that grow up and learn the business of professional services. But we also see people that went to business school, or they were in sales, and they decided to start their own engineering, technology business. And those journeys have to go both directions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a business principle in an MS, in professional services business, your understanding needs to be solid on both sides. And you need to surround yourself with the right team, because no one can be good at everything, right? And that's critical, right? Because you're not really going to become an expert in everything.
Yeah, I want to grab that. I want to grab it hard and run and talk about it. So my career prior to moving into the tech industry, I was a part of a business that believed to be a good leader, you had to understand how to execute at the ground level. So I went all the way up in operations, doing operations. In the restaurant industry, which is tough. I can make food, and I can teach people to make food because I know how to make food, which allowed me to be a really good leader when, as a high level executive, going into restaurants and being able to teach somebody by showing them gets you that buy-in. So if you're a business person that's looking to get buy-in from your tech team, maybe you need to learn a little bit of the tech so you can speak their language. And if you're a tech person that's trying to get buy-in from your sales team or your business guys, it's a great point that Matt made. You gotta cross paths. You gotta to learn to speak each other's language, and if you do, you're gonna have great community and great success.
And the customer's language.
Yeah, 100%. So my journey, I'm a salesperson by trade. Have been in the IT industry since the sort of mid 90s, and late 90s. I was selling solutions, the first SME networks, and I had to become technically aware. In order to understand it, to translate it to my non-technical customer, and that was the exactly as Matt said, coming the other way. So yeah, wholeheartily agree. And again, going back to that balance word, you've got to be ready. There's so many things you've got to be proficient at in order to be successful. So yeah, and that, we're all growing and learning all the time. So
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned early on that you've got somewhat of a framework, and I'd like you to touch on that before we run out of time. But
Mm-hmm.
I've been running across. I'm in the SaaS industry, and I was in the MSP industry, but now I'm in SaaS, and we've got our own metrics and measures, which are not the same thing that an MSP would be using. But I've been hearing a lot about EOS, Enterprise Operating System, and I don't have an opinion on it, but I'm curious, where, when people decide that they want to get serious about measuring their business and being strategic, what what are the first couple of steps that they need to be taking, and what are the few steps after that? Should they be picking up books? Should they be making phone calls?
Well, certainly everyone should be educating themselves and soaking up information. Not everyone is a bookworm and enjoys reading. Some people like audio books. Some
I
people
just
like
found audiobooks, and it's
it transforms your world, doesn't it? When
huge.
but yeah, I mean, EOS and in particular the traction book has really sort of cut through the MSP community because it just makes a lot of sense. Again, it makes a quite a complicated topic really easy to sort of munch your way through, and to it's not scary. But again, like all of these learnings, inspirations, you've got to take it and apply it to yourself. So even if you're not 100% following the EOS methodology, there'll be bits that you take from it that will improve your business, even just the crumbs off the table. But I think fundamentally, if you're going to dial it down to what should an MSP be doing, they've got to get a handle on their numbers, and that's the bit that, going back to that point I wanted to come back to, you can get away with not being on top of your numbers for quite a while. 500,000, 1 million of revenue, and if you let it get away from you, it can be really difficult. There's a huge overhead in security. There's a huge overhead in financial management, and you've got to have discipline in both. So yeah, you've got to obsess about your numbers and know exactly what margin you're making, because almost anything that you're going to do is going to require some level of investment, and you need to know, is it affordable? Can you do it for long enough? And I guess we're really tight on time now, but one of the things that growing MSPs need to do is they need to sell more, to existing customers and gain new customers, and all of that requires investment and a long commit. So you've got to know that you've got the funding to do that, and if not, be working towards the next bit. I can afford the marketing, I can afford the salesperson, I can afford to delegate my role so that I can do sales because I'm going to be the best salesperson for the business, and so on. That sort of approach.
So we'll make sure that those books, Traction and the EOS guide, make it into the show notes here. But Daniel, I guess, so give us the pitch here. Give us the plug. What you're clearly you're focused on this problem space. What are you bringing into MSPs, and what does your organization do?
So the MSP finance team, we're 2 years old. Myself and my co-founder Adam are both former MSP owners. We've both exited in trade sales. We both remain infused and interested in the community, and we both approach things from a financial perspective. So again. I've educated myself. I didn't know what a P&L and a balance sheet looked like when I was a salesperson, and I only started doing management accounts in my business because I had to, because we had some borrowing for growth, and we had to support that with management accounts, and that reality is carries on repeating today, and so yeah, we're on a mission to raise the financial literacy of MSPs. Ultimately, we want to make them happier and wealthier.
Good mission. I think a lot of people on the call today can sign off on that. Matt, you want to do ours?
So we're also very focused on our partner community succeeding. Fort Mesa helps MSPs and other IT outsourcers own their clients' cybersecurity roadmap. It helps them capture their customers' cybersecurity investments, because customers are your clients are looking for cyber insurance. They're trying to pass audits. They're trying to satisfy regulations, and they are going to spend money on that. And you should be the one to make it So that's us, and hopefully I'll be talking to some of you. Zach, you got any last words?
Not from me. I think that's gonna close it out for us. Thank you to our virtual guests for joining us. This is going to conclude another Friday at the Fort Mesa Roundtable. Be sure to like us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube for more educational content. Thank you so much for Daniel Welling from the MSP finance team for joining us for an awesome conversation about key performance indicators in growing an MSP. And be sure to join us next week, where we're going to have Luke Connolly and Brett Callow from MC Soft join us to have a conversation about the aftermath of the MOVEit vulnerability. And we'll talk a little bit about some malware related things as well next week. So be sure to join us. Thanks for coming. Thanks again to Daniel, and have a good weekend, guys. Bye.